The following program has been pre-recorded, so please don't call in at this time. If you wish to participate in the program, tune in at 5 p.m. every Wednesday for A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good evening, fellow humans. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio, 96.9 FM here in Baton Rouge. This is a live call-in show, and please feel free to call in with your thoughts, questions, and comments. 343-9927, 343-9927. The only rules are that you be respectful, concise, and voice your views as they are, opinions. Tonight's topic is we're going to talk to a couple of people about the Civil Rights Restorative Justice Project. Ada Goodley and Raymond Wilkes are in the studio with me.
Hello.
Good evening.
Hello.
How are you?
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Hopefully everything else will be too. And then we have my good old standby Lang Baker in here with me to add some brain power to the discussion. Good evening, Lang.
Hi, Wayne.
Okay, Raymond, Ada, start with telling us about the CRJ, the Civil Rights Restorative Justice Project, and then I'll ask you how you got into it, I suppose. But
Okay, sure. The Civil Rights Restorative Justice Project is the brainchild of Professor Margaret Burnham out of Northeastern University School of Law. She started the project in conjunction with Rose Zoltek-Jick of Harvard, and now a professor at Northeastern University School of Law, as well as Professor Melissa Nobles out of MIT, who was head of the political science department, is now a professor of political science. And they did this to document racial homicides in a period where murders of black people were gone largely unnoticed and uncategorized as racial homicides. And a part of documentation means that you have to have people to go out and investigate these things. So Professor Burnham launched a summer fellowship in conjunction with Southern University Law Center, where we had legal fellows from the Baton Rouge area as well as Mississippi participate in Freedom Summer and investigate a number of cases that happened in Mississippi and Louisiana. From there on, every summer, we've been doing this in partnership, and Raymond is one of the fellows that joined the year after I did and recently finished up the fellowship again in a supervisory capacity. So he can tell you a little bit more about that.
So I started summer of 2015 being introduced to it by the Southern University Law Center. And just as Ada said, we do find cases in these documents of racial homicides and investigate and see what happens from there. So I took on 3 cases last year, and one I was able to follow up thoroughly, and what we were able to do was actually let the family know what took place, because a lot of times the family knows that their family member was killed, but they don't know all that happens. And sometimes they don't even know what their family member even looked like. So in my case, they didn't even know what their uncle looked like. And it wasn't until we were actually able to investigate and obtain a photo that I can still remember on the phone. The niece, the youngest niece, who's in her 50s, broke down crying just on the fact that we were able to obtain a photo of her uncle. So things like that are what CRJ does. Though this past summer, my main job was to find and make a comprehensive racial homicide archive of racial homicides in Louisiana from 1930 to 1970. And so with that, what they're doing is they're trying to document, to literally say, this is for a fact what we know of what took place in the South. This also allows us to have an archive of more cases to investigate to find further justice for the families. So that's pretty much what I did.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a little bit about both of you, though, your backgrounds. You both have legal backgrounds, or?
Somewhat. I just graduated from the law center, and prior to, I was an intern with the city court, 14 years, Army Reserve. It's a different background, but it's a background of service, and I wanted to go into civil rights, but because I believe it is a position of service that you're definitely not doing it for the money if you get into civil rights.
No.
it's about service.
Yeah. And then for me, I'm currently a law student at the University of Law Center, and I found out about it while entering law school. And so that's how I've been working over the summer in and out of law school with CRJ.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned you're chronicling murder, civil rights murders.
Yeah.
Is anybody else going after the other crimes, like crimes of property where black people were either intimidated or murdered to steal their land and stuff like that?
So I actually had a case out of Mississippi, Cleveland Holmes, where he was murdered and his land was taken away. He had 14 children that were in the house. That night they were run off of the property. They walked out off of their property and never returned because their father was sleeping with a woman that the sheriff was also sleeping with. And the sheriff got the woman's husband to beat Cleve Holmes to death. It's just crazy, crazy, sordid tales of, sometimes passion, but usually it is police officers. Out of the cases that I've received, the majority have been police officers abusing their power in a way to effectuate murders, mass murders of people for the smallest of crimes.
And that puts in perspective, I guess, what Raymond and I were talking about before we went on the air. Most comfortable white Americans are totally unaware of how much violence has been perpetrated against black people by the police. Mm-hmm. And so when a young man is killed in a high-profile police shooting that can't be hidden, and the black community erupts in anger, the rest of the country is like, well, what's it's a terrible thing, but why are they so upset over this one death? Mm-hmm. But when it happens to you every day and you know your own history, that's got to be infuriating.
True, because there's a history with how the police became involved, because early in American history, we see like in the 1800s and early 1900s and post-World War II, it was mostly mob violence and lynchings that took place.
Right.
But eventually, due to the federal government, we see that it became a matter of legal lynchings, to where they would tell the mob to stop, allow the officers to take place, to where you can actually get the person from prison and lynch them, or they can bring them to court and kill them and just have a very biased jury and get it done that way.
Yep.
Right. And so that's where you see the beliefs and frustrations that the African American community has with the criminal justice system, because we see that from mob lynching to criminal justice or legal lynching. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Yeah, and looking into redlining, we did a show a few weeks ago on that, and when I looked into that just a little bit, I realized that was just one of the earlier legal ways that they had to adopt, because their violent, nasty ways were all outlawed. They couldn't kill people anymore. They had to give up slavery. They couldn't kill people anymore or trick them out of their property, commit fraud. Mm-hmm. And the reason they were all able to do those things before is because the law didn't protect black people. Mm-hmm. And so eventually they had to start making legal impediments to buying land and keeping land and stuff like that. And oh man, well, you mentioned you're chronicling all these. Are you guys involved in prosecutions or anything like that, or trying to address the injustices?
So where there is the ability to prosecute, which there rarely is because people age and they pass away, but where there is the possibility, we would contribute to that via our research and our interviews with people. But Professor Burnham was actually able to retroactively exonerate a 14-year-old George Stinney. He was killed when he was 14. He was electrocuted when he was 14.
Yeah.
And she
in
was
Louisiana?
This was in, I forget which state.
Okay. I thought we had the distinction of killing the youngest person in the country. Or the world.
Who knows?
But whatever. Whatever. Go ahead.
We're number one in so much.
So many things we shouldn't be. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But, she was able to retroactively get him exonerated from that crime. So things like that happen. But like I said, justice isn't always possible, and so we look to restorative justice measures. So I remember one case out of Yazoo City, Mississippi, Jesse Shelby, who was shot by a police officer while in a nightclub dancing with a girl that the police officer happened to fancy. Their family didn't have the money to bury him, and the officer had passed away. There was no one to prosecute. So we worked with the local NAACP to get him a headstone on his grave. And some people have gone so far as to get streets renamed after victims. There's different ways, and all depends on the circumstances and the resources available, but we don't think just because you can't solve the murder, you can't bring someone to justice through the court system, that all hope is lost for justice, because I believe there is some healing in truth telling and airing those grievances publicly.
Yeah, it may not be enough, but it's something for the people. Yes. I want to remind the listeners, this is Pause for Thought. You've got Lang Baker, Wayne Parker, and our guests with the Civil Rights Restorative Justice Project. Thank you. CRRJ. We have Raymond Wilkes and Ada Goodley on. Feel free to call in with your thoughts and comments. We're discussing yet another difficulty or injustice that is being addressed against Black Americans, African Americans. How many people are members of CRRJ? Do you have an idea of how big the organization is?
Well, the main campus has a clinic, so they teach students year-round at the Law Center, and then they also go out and research and investigate these students remotely. During the summer, we're on ground in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas.
On ground meaning?
On the ground. We're actually investigating, not just in the classroom, but we're actually out there looking for families, looking for evidence, going through courthouse attics for, looking through dockets, and that varies summer to summer. So the first summer we had it, because we had students in Mississippi and Louisiana, I think it was about 14. The next summer it was about like 6 or 7.
6 or 7, yeah.
And then I think you guys were down to
like 3 or 4.
3 or 4. So the problem is resources, number one.
Like everything, like every other good cause, they can't get money for it.
Exactly. And then the Emmett Till bill is, up for expiration. And so we have to have someone else championing that through the legislature. And I don't think John Lewis has the same vigor that he had back in 1994. So, we definitely need support in that way, because the resources that they dedicated to the federal government to investigate these cases have not been used very well to investigate these cases.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I'm looking at something from your website, CRRJ's website, about the Emmett Till Act, and it says here that, I guess it was passed in 2008, and it authorized appropriations for, I totaled it up, $13.5 million for all these activities. And they appropriated nothing for the first 2 years, and then finally in 2010 they released $1.6 million. And now it's going to come up for expiration, and they haven't. How much has been done? How much money has been?
Not very much. Emmett Till Bill 2 is, it's, I believe, going to be up for debate. But I would hope that it brings with it a dedication of those resources that were promised to it, because FOIA requests should not take 4 months for a response. People are, there is a sense of urgency in these cases too, where justice can, be sought, then it should be, and it should be very quickly, especially because people are aging, evidence is dwindling, and there has not been that motivation on the part of, the FBI and the DOJ.
No, and it just, to me, 2 things popped into my head when you were saying that. Number one, Black people have to look at that and say, well, that's to be expected.
Yeah.
And the other thing escapes me. But yeah, it just seems like it might be deliberate, that they're holding it up deliberate. That was my other thought, actually. And it's like, how many times have we seen that?
Right.
And that brings me to a question I had to ask, too. And Lang, jump in whenever you want, but the young people that go out into the rural South, it seems like it'd be kind of dangerous to be going in and looking into the past and things like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
It is,
you
huh?
do. We learn certain situations that even when we do our research, we can't even tell people we're doing civil rights research, just because you have people that will kind of back away from you and not really work with you, which you think would not happen in 2016 in Louisiana and even in some small communities surrounding Baton Rouge, but it still does happen. And so it's a matter of being smart and knowing and having context there to help you, or having people to say, don't talk here, go here, do, things like that, which you don't think should happen in 2016, but sadly it does happen.
Yeah,
So,
Sure.
You gotta read body language.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm surprised to hear both of you say you wouldn't think it would, occur now. But
Well, I mean,
even I, a
typically-
comfortable white guy, I figured it's happened. Of course, I just had my
Right.
eyes open. But go ahead.
Right. You would think that, you're saying I'm a law student and I'm doing some research and, the door of conversation would flow open. And sometimes people are really not impressed when you bring up civil rights.
Right.
You're going to bring up the past. Oh, you're those troublemakers.
Somebody's grandfather or
Yeah,
father,
yeah.
who's guilty of a crime or whatever, and
Yeah, Plaquemines Parish, the Historical Society. I remember I went through. I went to their meeting. I dropped in, and I love historical societies. In the more conservative parishes, such as Plaquemines Parish, I will not be visiting again. They will let you know you're not welcome. I don't know what you're here for, but you're not the right shade.
yeah. Did they actually say that?
No, but no one said hello to me. No one shook my hand.
Right.
No one,
They can make it clear. Yes.
Yeah, they can look at you from the sides of their eyes, but never ever directly talk to you. So there was a nice gentleman that definitely gave me some helpful information, but that was kind of one of those situations where I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't have just dropped in. I'm thinking New Orleans is very friendly. Plaquemines Parish is, right there. This is going to be the same kind of folk. But, Louisiana definitely has some very conservative.
But New Orleans is an exception, though, because New Orleans is one of the most liberal cities in the South.
Right.
So you can go to the library and they'll be like, oh, and they'll have a whole conversation with you. So it's a different experience in New Orleans.
Well, and like you and I were talking earlier too, what I've discovered is that it's largely ignorance that causes people to be bigoted in any way. And the reason New Orleans, and frankly, I've been to a number of American cities, and they're all pretty much liberal because there are a whole bunch of people from all different kinds of backgrounds living in a relatively small geographical area, and they run up against black people, non-whites or whatever, people of different religions, and they can see for themselves that they are human beings just like they are.
Yeah.
But the people that are out there in the rural parts of the country, they're isolated, really.
True, but at the same token, New Orleans still has its issues, because even most of the cases that I've seen and dealt with came out of New Orleans.
Yeah.
And so, but that's also a factor to where even in our research, the situation we run into is that the bigger cities have better resources and better funding, therefore they can document more. The smaller cities don't have those resources, so even if there was a paper and it might have existed, we're hoping that a bigger city maybe could contain it. And so that's the situation. But
Yeah.
New Orleans did have its issues, and you can kind of see that their police department is one of the biggest examples of things that you kind of need to. It's an example to show the history of African Americans and police and things like that. And so, yeah.
They're also under consent decree.
Yeah,
They have to behave.
They have to, yeah. They're being watched, yes.
Right.
Yeah, and that's something I have a hard time conveying to a lot of my white friends. It's like, I was telling my mother over the last weekend when I was there visiting, it's like, these people know they're vulnerable every minute of the day. They can't hide, and they know that when push comes to shove, they're going to get hurt in some way, and the system's not going to support them, or more than likely not going to support them. And that's a powerful thing that most white people just don't understand. We can't appreciate.
And just the conversations. I remember my mother even refused to buy my brother certain cars because she refused to allow him to look as if he was a big black man playing music in the car and get pulled over.
Yeah.
Or the fact that even me as a little kid, I learned that I can't run around in a department store and tie my shoes because literally when I was little, a woman went up to me and thought I was stealing and stuffing tags in my shoes.
Yeah.
But it's small things like that that we have to go through with our experiences, or to even know when you go to certain settings, you have to be careful, be mindful, be open.
Yeah.
So but it's those things to where if the conversation was open, things could change.
Yes, and that's all I guess most of us can do anyway, is just keep talking about it and get in people's faces and just be blunt about it, be honest. I want to remind the listeners, you can call in. This is a Pause for Thought. Dial 343-9927. We're talking with Raymond Wilkes and Ada Goodley with the Civil Rights Restorative Justice Project. And, of course, Lang Baker's here as my co-pilot.
I had a
Lang.
question area interested in knowing more about, and that you were describing the kind of things you've been doing here, and I'm wondering how you feel in terms of the participation and resources you have available. Do you need more people, or do you have a program for trying to outreach and recruit more people to participate? And your budget side, how that works, whether you've got enough there or whether you're constantly trying to fundraise, and if you could give me a little bit on that.
For the Civil Rights Restorative Justice Project, so for the Civil Rights Restorative Justice Project, a lot of the funding comes directly from grants. And so Professor Burnham did recently receive a decent grant. But I think it would be, of course, more ideal if more people were aware of the work of the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project and other cold case initiatives that are happening around the country, so that the importance would be prevalent and undeniable, so that these projects can continue to get funded, and even more resources or serious resources would be dedicated to them, so that they could be as successful as intended.
Yeah, I would like to see a regular press release, press conference, or whatever, highlighting the activities of your organization over the past month or quarter, whatever the period is, just to keep the issues out there, because people forget about them. If you're not affected by it, you forget about it.
Right.
And it just takes keeping people aware, keeping it in front of them. Getting back to work in the rural areas, though, I read Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy some time back, and this is where my naivety was exposed to me again. He quoted, I think it was a sheriff, bragging in the mid-1980s how they had lynched a fella up north of Mobile. I mean, he just flat out, just at a diner or whatever, was bragging about it. And, like, we'll deal with this guy the same way we dealt with, the guy and this was in the mid-'80s. And I have to really believe that once you get out into the rural South, and I've ridden my motorcycle through there on vacations before, there's nothing there, and you are totally vulnerable. There's small hamlets, and the people they might bring in to judge a case won't know the people. They'll probably be white, and it's just. But most Americans don't realize that we get a very idealistic view of what goes on in our country. But I wouldn't want to be a black person living in the rural South.
Yeah. Because even when we do our travels, we learn to travel in groups.
Yeah.
Because the average white American be like, oh, rural South, beautiful scenery, driving through and stuff. While we're like, okay, let's drive through, get out of here by nighttime in a safe location.
Yeah.
So it's a different experience through a different lens.
Yes,
Sundown
indeed.
towns exist.
Yeah.
Sundown towns definitely exist where you shouldn't be caught somewhere, especially where no one knows you or nobody can vouch for who you are. It's not a safe place to be. So there was a town that Lewis Allen was murdered in Mississippi. I believe it was Natchez, Mississippi, perhaps. But that's a town where we didn't go to because we didn't have a good entrance or exit strategy for, if people got wind. There are people that have held on to secrets up until today.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That are living today and refuse to talk because their neighbor is someone that could, trigger some alarms and set chaos in their lives.
Sure.
Yeah, so the fear is very real in these rural towns, and that's what makes our work even more difficult, because some people still aren't ready to let go. They still fear that there will be some repercussions for them.
They might have their inherited properties taken away from them or things like that. Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that adds another dynamic to it. It's not just racism now; it's fear of losing what they've had. So, speaking of crimes and all, I did a quick check for cases that you're following here in Louisiana. and I found one of Henry Hauser, who was beaten to death by the police while he was handcuffed.
Yeah.
Okay? And I thought of Victor White III recently,
Yeah.
who somehow managed to shoot himself in the right front part of his chest while handcuffed behind his back.
And
having
move his handcuffs.
yeah. Well, it happens apparently, right?
It must.
Yeah. And then there was, well, I was talking to Raymond too. The Harrison County Jail, when I lived over there, I was fixing up a house in the African American community in Gulfport, and I became friends with the neighbors. And one of their brothers happened to be visiting somebody who was raided by the police for drugs, and his brother got hauled off to the Harrison County Jail. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, did you get him out? And he said, oh, yeah, we went down there right away and bailed him out. We can't let him stay there. Mm-hmm. And I suspected what he was getting at, you know. And sure enough, some months later, a black man was murdered in the Harrison County Detention Center in the questioning room. Mm-hmm. He was handcuffed to a chair. And as it came out during the trial, this very large prison police officer, I guess, a white guy, was kicking him in the head, you know, and he killed him. Mm-hmm. Oops, you know. And, of course, you can't hide a dead body, you know. You can lie about beating somebody up. Oh, he fell down the stairs, you know, whatever. But if somebody's dead, you're kind of stuck.
Right. And a lot of times police would make sure that they killed a person before handcuffing them, before detaining them, before bringing them into custody, so that there wouldn't be an investigation. If the person is killed, you know, let's say in a chase, there's no need to alert the independent auditor or, you know, the people that come in and investigate independently. So you find a lot of cases where the police are saying, well, this person did something to provoke me and I had to shoot them.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. I'd like to change course a little bit here, because this is something I read one book or a chapter in a book years ago that talked about one instance. And then recently, a coworker of mine, Stephanie, told me about, I think it was Greenwood, Oklahoma, was the city?
Greenwood, Oklahoma. Yeah, Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay.
The Black Wall Street.
Yeah, it was the Greenwood district of Tulsa, yes. But here, looking at an article from titled "The Cold Cases of the Jim Crow Era" from the 2015 New York Times, Margaret Burnham and Margaret M. Russell talk about it. But it says here, they're also looking into several states, including North Carolina, Oklahoma, and Florida, have already sponsored commissions on race riots before 1930 that attempted to assess the long-term impact of the murders, looting, and arson and other property damage that ruined thriving American communities. Now, most white Americans hear that and they say, well, the blacks rioted and ruined their own property. But what happened there was the white people who resented these communities for being successful went in and wrecked everything they had.
Yes, I investigated one. I found a Greenwood in Sherman, Texas, North Texas, above Dallas, where a man was accused of rape. During his arraignment in court, a crowd had grown, you know, over the days, and they stormed the courthouse, burned the courthouse down. He apparently suffered in the vault that he was, you know, being secreted in. But they took his body, drug his body through the black district, burned every single business in the black district, and they were thriving at that time. Burned every single one of them down. There were, like, you know, 5 doctors and dentists and, you know, funeral parlors. Only one black doctor is in town today.
Yeah.
Those communities don't come back out of fear, out of, you know, necessity of life. I just want to, you know, I just want to live, you know. Yeah. And so who wants to go to a place that has a history of taking away everything that you've, you know, worked so hard to build?
You know, I was talking with some people at church some time back, and somebody pointed out that Germany now has laws requiring that the Holocaust and the Nazi era be taught in schools. Argentina requires, you know, all of that era with them, you know, with Pinochet, you know.
The dirty war in Argentina.
Yeah, the kids are taught that in school. And we, in America here, the land of the free, the greatest country in the world, aren't taught anything. And that's largely the problem, I think. You know, the people that need to know don't. We're clueless.
Marginalized.
Yes.
Yeah, relegated to the margins of the books.
Yes. Well, Oh, I'm leaving another show depressed. But anyway, it's been great talking with you,
Great.
Raymond
Thank you for
Wilkes,
having us.
Goodley.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'd love to have you back sometime, and anytime, and maybe we could talk about doing a regular show on the issues. What you're, give you an update,
Sure.
just to try to keep it out there a little bit. Okay, you've been listening to Wayne Parker, Lang Baker, Raymond Wilkes.